So we'll very briefly describe what we mean by emotion. So emotion arises from desire. So what is a desire? A desire is a flow of thought from your mind to an object or being in the world with the intentionality of possessing and enjoying that object. So I desire ice cream, I go out for ice cream. I desire a degree, study for a degree. I desire a marriage, so forth. The desire itself arises because we have a sense of incompleteness within. There's a sort of cognitive dissonance where we don't feel entirely whole. We see objects in the world which seem attractive, and we think if I get that object, my desire will be satisfied, and this feeling of incompleteness, this feeling of not being whole, it will go away. And temporarily it does. But the desire for fulfillment does not address the cause of that sense of incompleteness, which is the lack of knowledge of our own self, capital S. So let's just review that etiology. Lack of self-knowledge gives rise to a feeling of incompleteness. Where there is that feeling of incompleteness, thought then flows indiscriminately into the external world with the hope of acquiring and enjoying things. This is desire, and when desire is modified, we get an emotion. So this is what we can understand emotion to be. The question of whether logic is better than emotion. One of the things we need to understand is that neither logic nor emotion is better per se. It's a little bit like asking what's better, the brain or the heart. Well, without one, the other one's not going to function. You can't live without one. So it's not a matter of one being better. They are different parts of the human personality. They're different equipments, they have different functions. But to sort of explore the question a little bit more, we can say that logic is more subtle than emotion. So subtlety has two aspects that we discuss: pervasiveness and control. So the first is with regards to pervasiveness. The subtle exists where the grass does and beyond it. Again, the subtle exists wherever the grass does and exists beyond it. When you have something like a building, it's pervaded by space. So space is subtler than the stone. Why? Well, because the space exists wherever the stone does, and the space exists where the stone does not. It exists beyond it. How do we understand subtle and gross when it comes to the inner personality? So emotion is the mind. It's the field of memory, it's the past, it's the things that we know. When you look at logic, it can also go into memory. It can also relate to the past, what you know. In fact, when you're using logic, this is what you're doing. You're delving into the past, into things that you know. And you come up with new information that you previously did not know. You arrive at conclusions that were previously unknown to you, and now you make them known. Where emotion and mind only relates to what is known, logic, the intellect, can understand the known, and it can penetrate into the unknown. So it exists where the mind does and exists where the mind does not. Intellect is more subtle than the mind. Second aspect with regards to subtlety is control. What we mean by this is to say that a change in the subtle will necessarily result in a change in the gross. So there is a direction of causation here. So a simple example is that knowledge gives rise to our emotions. If I know something to be the case, now whether or not that knowledge is accurate or true, if I know something to be the case, then when the world interacts with that knowledge, I will experience a particular type of emotion. So the cause is the knowledge, the effect is the emotions. So that is the direction of causation, that is the direction of control. But it's not necessarily the case that if we have a particular emotion that we gain the knowledge from it. If that were the case, then every time we have a particular emotion, we would also gain an underlying knowledge of where the emotion came from. We gain an underlying knowledge of the causes of it. But what we recognize is that emotions come and go, often leaving us confused, and certainly we don't gain any deeper understanding just because we have had an emotion. We can use the emotion for study, reflection, and gaining further understanding, but the presence of emotion itself does not give us understanding or knowledge. So when it comes to the specific question of is logic better than emotion, again, it's not a matter of better. But what we do want is harmony between logic and emotion. We need a confluence of mind and intellect. So confluence basically means that they are flowing together towards the same target. One of the analogies we use is that of the adult and a child. So the intellect is like the adult, the mind is like a child. A child will not govern itself. It's too young, it doesn't have the capacity. That governance, that guidance is the job of the parent. In the same way, the mind has no capacity for self-governance. It's non-rational. The job of the intellect is to guide the mind. So when we talk about having a harmonious relationship between mind and intellect, what we're saying is that the intellect must lead the mind's emotions with logic. So this confluence of mind and intellect means that the intellect understands the mind's emotion and sanctions it. So you can take a simple example. Let's say the notion that helping people is good. And so you start to feel an expression of that as I want to serve others. It's a feeling. So the intellect will analyze this feeling. What am I experiencing? You name it. Where does it come from? What's its quality? Is it good or bad? The intellect understands it and says, yes, this is a positive emotion for your well-being. What's also happening is that the mind is starting to appreciate an idea, which is that when you serve others without expectation, you are suspending your egocentric perspective on the world and you naturally feel a sense of freedom. It's an idea, it's a concept of the intellect. As the intellect reflects on this idea, the mind starts to pick it up, to appreciate it, to imagine what it would be like, and it responds appropriately. It feels what the intellect is understanding. And so when we have this confluence of the mind and intellect both flowing towards that same target, this is the harmonious blend of mind and intellect. Not so much a matter of better, but working effectively towards our growth.